Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we are going to cover the 10 most effective chess gambits. So we are going to be talking about sound gambits, not the Halloween gambit, the Latvian gambit. We are going to talk about deadly aggressive gambits that actually work. We're going to be covering the Benko, the Smith-Morra, the Marshall, the Budapest, the Scotch gambit, the King's gambit, the Evans, the Albin counter gambit, the Vienna gambit, and finally the Queen's gambit, the best gambit of all. I'm going to give you a brief intro into each, and then I'm going to show you a very thematic game for each gambit that highlights just why it's dangerous. In number 10 we have the Queen's gambit, and you may not think of the Queen's gambit as an actual gambit, but since black is able to take, technically it is a gambit. It's called the Queen's gambit accepted, and white is able to regain the pawn in most cases, but it's still technically a gambit. It's by far the most effective one, with the highest percentage win rate for white on the highest level. And I had to mention it. Now we're going to be moving on to gambits in the real true sense of the word, starting from the least effective to the most effective, in my opinion. So the Queen's gambit, let's call it number 10 or like miscellaneous. In number 9, we have the Vienna gambit. Now, it's not among the most effective gambits, but it's extremely deadly. So after e4, e5, knight c3, the Vienna game, knight f6, white plays f4, sacrificing a pawn. This pawn should not be taken. If the pawn is taken, then white continues with e5, and the black knight, of course, only has one retreat square. It can only move back to g8. So after f4, the main and the only move for black is d5, and you get very interesting positions with the open f-file. Now, every gambit I'm going to be discussing today has been covered in a separate video. I have listed all of them below. You can see the theory, you can see the plans, you can see the structures, you can see each gambit in detail. So whichever gambit seems interesting, go down to the description and follow the link to that video. Now I'm going to show you a Vienna gambit game. For each of the gambits, I'm going to show you one very, in my opinion, impressive game. Let me just get my keyboard. So e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, f4. This is the game between Heinens and Jan van Raalte. d5, which is the main move. All of this is theory. Now in this position, knight takes e4 is the only move probably. Knight f3, bishop e7, and queen e2. Queen e2 is slightly more popular than d4 or d3. Okay, knight takes c3, the pawn was threatened. D takes c3, black castles, and white plays bishop to f4. We can see what's coming. The f-file is open. White wants to castle queenside. We are still following mainline theory. Queen a5 is still the move. a3 is one of the moves to defend the pawn. The other move was king b1. Black played bishop e6. And in this position, h4 has been played twice. White played queen f2, which, you know, sometimes threatens to transfer the queen to the king's side, either to g3 or to h4. And it's already looking slightly dangerous. That being said, each of these gambits, except for the Queen's gambit, comes with a downside, and of course it's a sacrifice of material. And sometimes to get this initiative going, which you're trying to get with a gambit, you're not just risking the material, you're also doing that to the detriment of your own position, which in this case is, you know, highlighted by the move a3. If black is at any point able to advance with c4 and sacrifice material, then, you know, at least a draw can be attained. In any case, knight c6 by black, queen g3. Okay, bishop h6 might be coming, knight g5 might be coming, bishop d3 might be coming, rook f8. Okay, black isn't concerned, knight g5. Be careful. b5, knight takes e6, f takes e6, and bishop d3. Now, how do you defend How do you defend your kingside? If you turn on the engine here, the engine says plus 0.7, plus 0.8. White isn't winning, but defending this seems incredibly difficult to me. Bishop f8, queen h3. Okay, g6 has to defend, rook hf1. Now we see the benefit of the open f-file. Had white not played f4 in the Vienna Gambit, he wouldn't have an open f-file now. c4 finally, okay, making progress. Bishop e2. I wasn't sure whether white was able to cash in on his advantage straight away. It might be possible to play bishop g3 or bishop g5 with mating threats, but bishop e2 is the best move. Queen c7. Yeah, I was slightly surprised that black wasn't tempted to sacrifice on a3, but it doesn't amount to anything. Okay, queen c7, bishop g4, threatening to take on e6, queen e7 defending, queen g3, now liberating the h-pawn. And after h4, it's clear that black is in trouble. Bishop g5, queen d7, bishop f6, h6, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook f6 should have been the final move of the game. It's already over, but black played knight d8, and after queen h3, overwhelming e6 almost, black played rook a6, and on h5, black resigned. There is no salvation at this point. There is basically nothing you can do. If you play g5, there's rook g6. If you take that, there is bishop h5, and black resigned. So the Vienna Gambit is very, very, very effective. Now, number 8. To help you choose which gambit you would like to play, I've created a theme on Noctie where you can try every gambit out, well, except for the Queen's Gambit, which I didn't include because it's not actually a gambit. I've chosen interesting positions for each gambit. You can find them all below, just follow the link. So let's say you go to the Marshall Gambit. I've set it so that you can play with black, and you get to choose what to do. Noctie is going to be giving you immediate feedback. Yellow isn't as great, and Noctie is going to be playing like a human against you. So I've set Noctie's difficulty to about 1700 FIDE. So you get to play against a human-like opponent that's going to make human-like mistakes. So the reason I mostly use Noctie is the themes, and as you can see here, I've created many over time. I basically prepare for each tournament game using Noctie's themes. So this is my preparation for Lovro Čupić. He's a Croatian FIDE master. This is Željko Benamatic, Željko Bedić. I also study my openings, and I study strategic principles. You can also, of course, use Noctie to learn openings. I have many repertoires which I train in Noctie. So basically, instead of learning theory and learning lines and trying to analyze positions, you get to play them out against a human-like opponent, which, unless you have a sparring partner constantly available, is the best thing one can do. Follow the link below if you want to get that theme with the gambits, and if you decide to go premium on Noctie, use the code Hanging Pawns to get a 64% discount. Let's go back to the gambits. The Albin counter gambit. The Albin counter gambit is, believe it or not, incredibly effective, and it's the position we reach out of the Queen's Gambit where black simply plays e5 and just wants to get rid of this d pawn. So after d5, black advances with d4, has space, has this very effective diagonal, the b4 square, the checking square, and in most cases white is forced to play a3. I'm going to show you a game played by Paul Keres in this gambit. His opponent is Aivi Karu, who I'm guessing is also Estonian. It sounds either Estonian or Finnish. So d4, d5, c4, e5, okay, knight c3, not accepted. d5 is the main move. E takes d4, queen takes d4, and now knight c6, sacrificing the d5 pawn. However, look at the initiative. Queen takes, bishop e6. You could play queen takes d8, but that just helps black's development, so queen b5. a6, inviting black to take on b7 and lose even more time. Of course, knight, rook b8 and knight b4 would come, which would be devastating. So queen a4, bishop b4, compare the development. Bishop d2, bishop takes c4, gets his pawn back. So this is now equal material, but compare the positions. a3, b5, queen c2, knight d4, queen e4 check, doesn't matter, bishop e7. He also could have played knight e7, but it makes no sense to sacrifice the bishop. Knight f3, c5, rook c1, knight f6, queen b1, queen d6, making room for the rook, and also introducing or also preventing bishop f4 ideas. Knight takes c takes, knight e4, knight e4, queen e4, and castles. Look at white's king. Keres went on to win this game very, very comfortably. White wasn't able to develop ever, and after b3, Keres cashed in his advantage with d3. If you take the bishop, of course, you are completely losing. I hope you can see why. If b takes c4, then simply b takes c4. There's no need for anything fancy. This pawn is pinned. You're going to be making two queens. So on d3, e4 was played. Bishop c3 check. Bishop d2 only move. Queen d4. Now we're threatening to exchange and play queen c3. White obliged. Rook d2. Rook takes e4. And of course, on queen takes e4, there is queen c1. And that's the end of the game. Rook d1. d2 might be one of the prettiest checkmates you're going to see today. So that's the Albin. It's a very, very interesting positional gambit. Okay. In number 7, we have the famous Evans Gambit, not named after Larry Evans, the American Grandmaster, but it was named after some Captain Evans 200 years ago. So basically in the Italian, you could play a normal move like c3 or castles, you could, or you could play the Evans Gambit. Now, this has been employed by Caruana, Grishchuk, Carlsen, Kasparov, I don't know, every strong player probably at some point. And it's perfectly playable. It's not a bad opening at all. Black is equal, but no more than that. The idea is, after bishop takes b4, which is forced, c3, we gain time against the bishop, and once the bishop moves back, we play d4. So white is getting central control and rapid development and tempi on the bishop in exchange for a pawn. So I'll show you a very famous game played in 1995 between Garry Kasparov and Vishy Anand. I mean, you couldn't imagine a higher level game in 1995. So Garry Kasparov against Vishy, who was his world championship contender, plays the Evans Gambit. Bishop takes c3, bishop e7. That's another way to play. Bishop a5 is just more popular. d4. Knight a5 is the main move, targeting the bishop. Okay, bishop e2 has to save the bishop. ed, queen d. Interesting. You can also play cd, but queen d is better because it doesn't allow the check. And it also targets g7. Knight f6, e5, knight c6, queen h4. You can see that obviously white has a lot more space, a lot more open lines to work with. Knight d5, still theory, queen g3, g6, still theory, the pawn was attacked. Castles, knight b6. And in this position, c4 is one move. You can also play bishop h6. c4 played by Kasparov, preventing knight d5 in any lines, and also, probably more importantly, introducing the idea of bishop b2 at an opportune moment. d6 by Vishy, rook d1, knight d7, targeting e5. And now bishop h6. Knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, knight c3, f6. Well, what do you do if not f6? If Vishy is ever to bring his king to safety, he's going to have to play f6 and king f7. I don't see a better way to do that. If you play bishop f8, for example, then bishop takes f8, and on rook takes f8, there is c5. And on king takes f8, there's also c5. So f6 is understandable. It's worse for black, but it's understandable. c5 anyway. The pawn is pinned. At least now the e5 knight is defended and the king has f7. Not that king f7 is good, because even something like queen e5 and bishop c4 check might work. Knight f7, dislodging the knight, but the bishop, but not a good idea, because now cd6, cd6, queen e3, and yeah, at this point Vishy should have resigned. He played on a bit longer. Still unable to castle. Bishop f8, queen e3 check, king f7. If you play queen e7, then queen d2, just declining. There's no need to trade queens, of course. Knight d5, bishop e6, knight f4, queen e7, and after rook e1, Vishy finally resigned. Ideas, I don't know, maybe bishop f5, but now bishop c4 check, and you resign anyway. On king g7, queen e7 check, loses the piece. On bishop e6, of course you lose a piece as well. So the Evans Gambit can be very, very tricky, and it's very effective. Next up, we have probably the most famous gambit of all, the King's Gambit. And when I say King's Gambit, I mean specifically the accepted gambit with knight f3, not bishop c4. I mean knight f3, the proper King's Gambit. I'm going to show you a game you must have seen before. This is the game between Morphy and Andersen, played in 1858. The King's Gambit was employed by many strong players, such as Bronstein, Spassky, Judith Polgar. The top guys have been playing the King's Gambit in all stages of chess history. Okay, Andersen accepts the King's Gambit. Knight f3, g5, this is the main line. h4, g4, main line stuff. The Kizaritsky Gambit with knight e5, knight f6, knight takes g4, knight e4, and d3. So the idea behind the King's Gambit is to, of course, accelerate development and open up lines towards the black king. As a consequence, you're also opening up lines towards your king. Knight g3 by Andersen, the main move. And of course, Morphy has to ignore the rook in the corner. There's no way to defend it anyway. So bishop takes f4, knight takes h1. In this position, the engine says equal. But queen e2 check, queen e7, knight f6 check, king d8, bishop takes c7 check, king takes c7, knight d5 check. This position, believe it or not, has been played 5 times since this game on a very high level. The last time it was played in Matoso Mandai, played in 2021. If you turn on the engine, this is equal, okay, and there is only one way for black to stay equal. That's king d8, of course. Knight e7, bishop e7, queen g4, and all of this analysis, which is the best engine line by far, the only line that's sound for white and that doesn't lose for black, has been analyzed by Morphy almost 200 years ago, and effectively, played by Andersen, who might not have been prepared for that. However, d6, queen f4, rook g8, queen f7, bishop takes h4, king d2, rook e8. Look at both kings, but white's queen seems to be incredibly effective at restricting the black king. The black king has 0 squares. Knight a3 played by Morphy, knight a6, queen h5, targeting the bishop, bishop f6, and now queen takes h1. Morphy got the piece back, and after bishop b2, queen h4, king d7, rook b1, bishop a3, queen a4. Andersen resigned, of course. So the King's Gambit, of course, is a very effective gambit. It's very risky, but it's fun. Next up, what's that, number 5? Yeah, in number 5 we have the famous Scotch Gambit. So in the Scotch game, after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, e takes d4, the normal move is knight takes d4, which is the Scotch game. But the Scotch Gambit is bishop c4. Similar ideas to every gambit we've seen so far. fighting for the initiative, giving up a pawn in this particular case to target black's king side. I'm going to show you an incredible game. This game was played in 2015 between Tor Fredrik Kasen and Hans Askov Jensen. White was 2000 and black was 1400. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, ed, bishop c4. Okay, black played bishop b4 check, which is a move, not common, but it's a move. And white played bishop d2, which is, I don't know bishop d2, to be honest. The main move here is c3, just, you know, the line goes c3, d takes c3, and castles. And you're hoping they take so that you can play bishop b2. In any case, bishop d2 by Tor Fredrik Kasen, knight f6, bishop b4, knight b4, and e5. Same problem we've seen in multiple gambits, such as the Vienna gambit, where the knight is kind of offside. So black played queen e7, white castled, targeting the knight again. The knight has to move, a3. And now, you know, if you don't play queen c5, which is actually a good find by a 1400 player, you lose a piece. Knight bd2 defending the bishop. Now the knight must move. And b4, misplacing the queen so that it can no longer defend this knight. Black sacrificed a piece. Queen takes b4, knight g5, and now all the pieces are coming. Queen h5 should have been the end of the game, but black fought on. h6, bishop takes f7, king h8, queen g6, and black, of course, gave up. If you take the knight, queen h5 is checkmate. If you don't take the knight, queen h7 is checkmate. So the Scotch Gambit can be very, very effective at any level, and of course it is played on every level. In number 4, we have my nemesis, the Budapest Gambit. So I have recently read the book Squeezing the Gambits, which covers how to play against Albin, Blumenfeld, Budapest, and Benko. And after reading the chapter on the Budapest, I now finally feel comfortable to deal with this annoying opening. I hate the Budapest Gambit when I have white. So it's e5 against the Queen's Gambit, or not the Queen's Gambit, d4, knight f6, c4, e5. And when d5 is played, black plays knight g4. Black is going to regain that pawn unless white does something crazy. You know, there are lines with bishop f4, which I don't particularly like. They're the main lines. Personally, so far I've been playing knight f3. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you one game. This is the game played between Bigler and Pepperle. I have no idea who those people are, and apparently this was a correspondence game. I was looking for interesting games in the Budapest. So c4, e5, and in this game, white declines the gambit, which is definitely playable. I mean, there are many, many games where white has declined the gambit. Bishop c5. You can see the same theme, sort of. The problem on f2, which was apparent in the Scotch Gambit, and in the King's Gambit, and in the Evans Gambit. h3 by white, which makes absolutely no sense. There are ways to survive here, of course. Knight c3 is equal, e3 is equal, also a3 is fine, covering the b4 square, but h3 is actually losing immediately, and I think this is a very nice pattern. Bishop f2 check. Now, you're taking that bishop. If you don't, then, you know, what are you doing? King takes f2, knight e4 check. King f3, queen h4. Yeah, good luck. g3, queen takes g3, king takes knight, f5 check, king f5, d6 check, king e4, bishop f5 check, king takes f5, queen g6 checkmate. 11 moves of absolute brilliancy by black. Not that white was a great opponent, but this just goes to show how effective the Budapest can be. Now, next up, probably the most famous on a very high level and employed regularly by super GMs today is the Marshall Gambit, also known as the Marshall attack. So the idea for black in the Spanish is to castle on move 7 instead of playing d6. And after they castle, there are many anti-marshal lines with h3 and a4 and even d4 and d3. But if white plays c3, going into a normal closed Spanish, black could play d6 and play the closed Spanish, or black could play d5, the marshal gambit. And the point is, after e takes d5, knight takes d5, this pawn on e5 is hanging, hence gambit. So knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5. White has won a pawn. However, c6, d4, bishop d6, the rook moves back, and now look at what's going on here. Personally, I have faced the marshal. I have never played it myself, but it's incredibly interesting. The only downside is that since it's such a popular opening, most people know a lot about it. So from here, there are 10 more moves of theory. I'm going to show you a game by Frank Marshall. So the famous story goes that Marshall had been preparing his famous gambit for about 10 years before he sprung it upon Capablanca for the first time. And very famously or infamously, he actually ended up losing that game, despite surprising Capablanca. But a bit later on, he of course still kept playing it. This is the game he played against Jag Batel. I have no idea who Jag Batel is. I'm guessing he isn't a top player. So d5. Okay, the Marshall gambit. Ed, knight d, knight e5, rook e5, c6. Okay, and in this position, his opponent took on d5, which is weird. Of course, d4 is the main move. He took on d5, cd5, d4. Now again would have been normal, but queen f3. And Marshall plays bishop d6, which is good. It might have been better to play queen c7, but okay. Bishop d6, rook e2. Believe it or not, the losing move. He should have gone rook e1. What's the problem with rook e2? Well, there's this diagonal. So Marshall simply plays queen g5. And not only does he have a good attack here with all the pieces being included very quickly, but he's also threatening to win the exchange in one move. So h3 has to be played. But now, unfortunately, bishop f5 and all of black's pieces are coming. And if a bishop lands on d3, white's never going to develop. Rook e1. It would have been better to go knight a3 and just, develop somehow. Rook a8, king f1. And now he could have ended the game straight away with rook e1, king e1, rook e8, king d1 probably, and queen g6. But instead he played bishop e4, which is also winning. Rook takes e4. Seems forced. You can play queen e4. You don't have any other squares for your queen. If you play queen g3, this is interesting. Then queen g2, of course, is mate. So he plays rook e4, knight a3, queen e5. It would have been more precise to play d4 here, of course, but okay. And after queen e5, knight c2, queen h2, knight e3 has to defend mate, bishop f4, bishop e3, fe3, rook fe8, and from here the game lasted a few more moves. And Marshall wrapped it up. He could have, of course, played rook g2 here. That's also winning, but he chose to end the game with rook f6 and rook takes g3. The Marshall gambit is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Now in number 2. In number 2, an opening I face all the time now when I play the Sicilian in my training games, the Smith-Morra. I cannot stand it. I think, well, you're going to see what number 1 is, but the Smith-Morra is incredibly effective. So against the Sicilian, white plays d4, gives up a pawn for development. And once black accepts that, white gets tremendous initiative going. And what I normally do against the Smith-Morra is I'm going to play knight c6, e6, a6, knight e7 and knight g6 with f6, which is the safest setup. It's just, you're trying not to lose. And still there are many knight d5 sacrifices and so many attacking patterns. I'm going to show you a game that lasted literally 7 moves. This is the game David Zardus versus Anthony Stevenson, played in 1986. So d4 the Smith-Morra, cd, c3, dc, knight c. Okay, d6, playable move, definitely one of the moves. Bishop c4, and in this position, Black needs to play, you know, carefully and develop quickly. Black played knight f6, which isn't the most precise move, but it's fine. e6 is best. And after e5, he lost the game to a very famous pattern. I mean, I'm guessing you can see what needs to be done here. The only move is knight fd7, otherwise you resign. He took the pawn, and of course, bishop f7 is the end of the game. So the Smith-Morra can end in a couple of moves. It's completely sound, extremely effective, even for someone like myself. And I study my openings. When I face the Smith-Morra, even though I'm well prepared, I constantly get uncomfortable positions. And in number 1, the best gambit of all time, the Benko Gambit. There are no words to describe just how good the Benko is. I've been playing d4, c4 for 3 years now, and along with the Budapest, the Benko is my biggest arch enemy. As I've mentioned already, I've studied Squeezing the Gambits, a great book where I've picked up a new way to play against the Benko. But up until recently, I would just, you know, this is the position I would play. I would accept the Gambit, I would get this position with white, then I would go g3, king g2, knight f3. And Black has a couple of things. Black has the bishop on g7, and Black has 2 open files for their major pieces. Despite being a pawn down, or because they are a pawn down, they have so many open lines that, firstly, it's incredibly likely that Black's going to get the pawn back. Secondly, it's unlikely that White is going to survive without mistakes, especially on my level. My last Benko Gambit game I won with the closed or declined Benko. The last time I'd accepted the Gambit, I actually lost the game. So now I'm going to show you a great Benko game played by Paul Benko himself, a Hungarian-American grandmaster who introduced or revived this opening that has until then only been played very seldom and on a low level. So, b5 the Benko. Oh, I should flip the board though. Okay, the Benko, c takes b, accepted by his opponent Gerard Aspler. This was played in 1971. a6, ba6, bishop a6, the fully accepted Benko. Knight c3 is fine. d6, knight f3, g6, g3. Okay, the fianchetto Benko. Bishop g7, bishop g2, castles, castles. Knight bd7, e1, queen b6. Now the major pieces are coming. The f rook is going to come to the b file. The e5 square is the most important square in the Benko, same as in the Benoni, and Black needs to make sure that White doesn't easily advance with e5. Rook fb8, look at the major pieces, look at the diagonal, look at Black's activity. Who cares about the pawn? h3, excuse me, misplacing the knight, knight g5, knight e5, knight e5. f4, of course, is incredibly dangerous due to c4 check in many cases. b3, knight d3 targeting the rook has to move, rook d1, c4. Okay. Now this is an attack on f2. If the queen moves, queen takes f2. Also, the knight on c3 is hanging, so you must do something. So if you don't do anything, bishop takes c3. So bishop e3, queen b4, double attack on the knight, bishop d2, queen c5. Now if bishop e3 is repeated here, then, well, c takes b3 is good enough, because now it's a double attack on the knight, and if bishop takes, then pawn takes, of course. So he played rook f1, cb3, ab3, and knight b4. Now, if you play bishop takes c3 straight away, then queen takes c3 is kind of equal. So knight b4 first, of course. Queen b2, Now the knight is pinned to the queen and to the rook. Rook c8, queen a3, unpinning, but losing the knight. Bishop c3, queen c3, rook fc1, queen d4, bishop f1, and rook c2 was the final move of the game. This is a very, very clean Benko gambit where, you know, Paul Benko just controlled e5, very simply got his rooks to the A and B files. This is the most harmonious Benko position that you can get, and this is exactly what Black is trying to achieve. So these are the 10 most effective chess gambits in my opinion. Again, all the separate videos are listed below if you want to know more about any of them or all of them. Hope you got something from the video. Let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.